Um, Representative Hoyle, last week, the big, beautiful bill was passed into law, signed into law by President Trump. All Democrats in both chambers voted against it. Why is it bad policy for Oregonians?
There's so many reasons, and here's the thing. Nearly 1,000 pages of this bill that was first brought up in the House at 1 o'clock in the morning, rushed through, no amendments allowed by Democrats. Understand, in the House, you know, there's a 4-vote majority that Republicans have, so it's a very close majority. Normally, you have a public process where people could weigh in. We had Republican legislatures, hospital CEOs in rural conservative communities, food banks, other people saying this bill will be devastating to our economy, to our rural hospitals, to health care, to SNAP benefits, you know, to children, all kinds of issues, and nothing was allowed. This was about being a loyalty test to Trump. No matter what was in it, Republicans needed to go along, you know, check the box so that he could sign a bill into law on July 4th. And again, for Oregonians, whether it's the Medicaid cuts, the elimination of the hospital provider tax, the elimination of timber receipt sharing going back to our rural counties in the ONC, that money will not go to our counties and will go right back to Treasury. That is devastating for our communities. SNAP benefits, what's happening with immigration. ICE now has a larger budget than the Russian military, than every other law enforcement agency and our Department of Prisons combined. And we are a trade-dependent state and a tourism-dependent state. People are not buying from America internationally, and people are not coming to America. So, you know, that and the loss of investment in green energy jobs, just across the board, there are really, really bad things that the American people have not had time to look at. This is not how business should be done, and the American people should expect better. And not for nothing, this blows a giant hole in our deficit of over $5 trillion. So this is not using taxpayer dollars well, and I think is irresponsible financially.
We're going to get in a little bit more of the specifics of some of the things you brought up in the bill. As someone who was there in Washington as this played out, you know, a lot of people were following it and, you know, went to the Senate. Question of Lisa Murkowski, Senator Murkowski from Alaska. She ultimately voted for it, but said she wanted to see it changed in the House. When it went to the House, did you think it was going to get changed and go back to the Senate, or did you anticipate it moving through?
I anticipated moving through, and we heard, like, Murkowski knew it was going to pass, so she made the deal she could for Alaska, right? But fundamentally, if I had a few of my Republican colleagues that found their backbone and stood up for what was right for their constituents instead of falling in line because they were afraid to speak up because they might lose their seat, and quite frankly, as we've seen in Minnesota, we have had more and more and more dangerous threats to elected officials. Lisa Murkowski said she has gotten threats that she's afraid of, but you know, I knew it wasn't going to pass because, again, it wasn't about the policy. It was about a loyalty test to Trump. And I took an oath, just like my colleagues, to the Constitution of the United States, to represent the people of this district in the United States. I did not swear an oath to be loyal to a man and to a president. And that's what we've got happening right now. And I think, quite frankly, it's a disgrace.
Republicans, in their defense of voting for the bill, two Republicans voted against it in each chamber, in fact, but obviously almost all Republicans voted for it. They say, in regards to Medicaid, they say that their goal is to essentially pull undocumented immigrants off Medicaid and able-bodied, non-working adults.
So undocumented immigrants are not eligible for Medicaid. So that is a farce. That's just BS, plain and simple. They're not eligible for Medicaid. They're not getting it. Period, end of story. If someone is not here legally, is undocumented, shows up at the ER with a stroke or a heart attack, or, you know, a hospital has to treat someone who is, you know, give them emergency medical treatment. That's it. they're not eligible. Number two, Republicans say there's a ton of people that are able-bodied, could work, and that they shouldn't have Medicaid. Agreed, but that's not what this is. Over 17 million people will be kicked off of Medicaid, and let me tell you how. For Oregon, it will cost us $100 million to get the, to be able to comply with this work requirement, where every 6 months you have to prove that you're still eligible. Now, I have family members who, one suffers from schizophrenia, another one has had traumatic brain injury. It is really difficult to fill out all of that paperwork. I mean, I help my family members, but if you're moving a lot, if you're compromised, if you've got dementia, if you've got an issue, if you make a mistake on that paperwork, they can throw you off. And understand, the cruelty is the point. You know, you've got people on SNAP benefits, many of whom are working, who are getting $6 a day. $6 a day. And that program was gutted. Why? So that we can pay for tax cuts for those people who are the most well off, the top 5% of income earners in the country, on the backs of the most vulnerable. So, you know, what we heard was, again, Republican legislatures, the legislature in Georgia, in North Carolina, these are overwhelmingly, you know, supermajority Republican hospital CEOs in rural communities. These are not in liberal progressive areas calling and saying these cuts will be devastating. Again, the provider tax for rural hospitals. 11 of our 33 rural hospitals are in danger of closing, on the edge of closing. The provider tax says hospitals tax themselves, and then they get matching money by putting money in to help those hospitals run. When you shut down a rural hospital, let's say the hospital in Coos Bay closes, or out in frontier areas like in Ontario, you know, out in Eastern Oregon, that means people have to drive hours to a hospital. That means they're not going to get care if they've got a stroke within an hour, if they're having a baby, if they're, you know, we're going to have to fly people to other places. This is more expensive, and this just makes absolutely no sense. So if they felt good about these policies, they would have brought them forward, not at 1 in the morning, not keeping the vote open all night while they pressured people. They do it in the light of day so the American people could have weighed in. They would have taken some of our amendments, right? I represent almost 800,000 people, just like my Republican colleagues, and yet didn't take any of our amendments, even the sensible ones. They wouldn't even look at it. So this was about a loyalty. This was about loyalty to Donald Trump, and again, blowing up our deficit, which is why Representative Thomas Massie voted against it, on the backs of working people with a bunch of talking points that actually, when you look at the policy, don't make sense. But my constituents can't eat a talking point. They need jobs, and again, we need our rural communities to be able to do for themselves. And that's not what this bill does.
And to your point, we spoke with the Bay Area Hospital. You mentioned the hospital in Coos Bay. You know, some of this, they still have to see how it all plays out, but they expressed concern. We did do that story earlier this week. You know, you mentioned that it essentially extends the tax breaks from 2017, Trump's original tax cuts from his first term, which did give a big tax break for the wealthy. Now, in truth, though, there were tax cuts for middle-income families as well in there. People who are middle-income did see lower taxes. The proportion certainly favored the wealthy. But for people who want to see and want to pay less taxes, is there an argument to be made in favor of extending those cuts because of the opportunities they do present for middle-income families?
I think that, you know, if this bill was put forward to actually benefit middle-income families, right? Because we know that trickle-down economics doesn't work. I mean, what this bill was trickle-down cruelty. It really doesn't benefit middle-income families much at all. It overwhelmingly benefits those people who are at the top 5% of income earners. I'm not saying there isn't anything good in the bill, and we should have had that discussion. But when you're, you know, cutting funds to rural communities, to the SNAP program, $6 a day, to the most hungry, I don't, it is an incredibly beneficial program. Do we want to, take out waste, fraud, and abuse and make sure people who are not eligible or deserving don't get benefits? Sure, then let's talk about that. But that's not what this is at all.
You introduced the Wildfire Resilient Communities Act. Hope to bring in more money for wildfire defense and prevention. What are the goals of this legislation?
So the goals of this is to take $30 billion and give it to the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management so that they can do the work to ensure that we're prepared for wildfire season, so there's not as much to burn. Also to restore the programs that allowed us to get out ahead, like the Job Corps programs we had out in Douglas County, the Wolf Creek Job Corps program that put kids that were really struggling out into the woods to learn skills and work ethic, and also help make sure that there was less out there to burn. Those programs were there. I introduced that with Senator Merkley. I've also been working with Senator Tim Sheehy, Republican from Montana. He owned a wildland firefighting company, and we're working together. He, of course, has more of an ear of the administration than I would. I'm a Democrat, of course, but I'll work with anyone. And we're working together to come up with practical solutions on how to keep fires small and then make sure we're investing to make sure things don't burn. I'm also working with Democrats and Republicans on a tribal co-management for our federal lands. Our tribes managed forests for millennia and did a hell of a lot better than we did. And with DOJ firing so many federal workers, they're having difficulty keeping up with the work. And if we can come up with a tribal co-management plan for some of our federal lands, this both allows public access, allows us to get ahead of making sure that there's less things to burn, and keeping our forests healthy so that we're protecting our old growth in a way that, again, our Native Americans have been doing for millennia. So there are things that we are doing and moving forward. I'm very proud to have introduced this bill with Jeff Merkley, and also working with the Republicans in any way I can, while calling out the things that I think are egregious and wrong. You can do both, and I'll work as hard as I can. Although this week we're supposed to be in DC. I have a number of constituents coming out. We were supposed to have a meeting with the Department of Transportation on the Coos Bay Port project, but Mike Johnson and his leadership decided that they had done enough and canceled all our committee hearings and work in DC. So I'm spending this week just going around the district and meeting with constituents and calling people in DC and across the country to do whatever we can to blunt some of the worst damage of this bill.
A few weeks ago, you voted against moving forward an impeachment vote for President Trump, and you explained it, saying that in a way there was no way it was going to move forward, no way it was going to pass. What is the process you take in? You're talking about just sort of reaching out to Republicans, and what is the process you are taking to make sure that you're focused on legislation that actually can move forward and ultimately get signed by the president?
Right.
Because if you know it's something that President Trump's against, is it something that you would be willing to bring forward? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Right.
Your role in kind of navigating being in the minority.
Right. So if more people had districts like mine where they couldn't get elected with one party or another, 42% of my constituents, my voters, aren't Republicans or Democrats. And so I take it very seriously that I represent a lot of different people with a lot of different politics, who are mostly working class, working people that just want politics and the system to work for them. And they know it's not working for them right now. I will not hesitate to call out Donald Trump and the unconstitutional, things his administration is doing in the executive overreach, in what they're doing without picking up people without due process, literally building internment camps in the United States, sending people to countries that they're not even from. All of those things are wrong. The things in the bill that I think are wrong, I'm going to call out. I signed up with, instead of voting for the impeachment bill, which was submitted 2 hours before it came to the floor. We had a half an hour notice. I hadn't read the bill. I'm not going to vote on something I haven't read. But previous to that, I joined Democrat Ro Khanna from California and Republican Thomas Massie in bringing forward the War Powers Act when Trump bombed Iran, saying Congress is the only body that can declare war, and the president needed to come to Congress. Now, to be fair, I did that when Joe Biden was in office, when he bombed Yemen without coming to Congress. So presidents, Democrats and Republicans have abused the War Powers Act. That's something that's bipartisan. That's something that's clear. That's something I've been consistent on, regardless of who's in charge. And that's something that I think we should move forward. The impeachment resolution brought forward by Representative Al Green was something that he didn't work with anyone before he brought it forward. And again, the Republicans, do I want Jim Jordan to be in charge of an impeachment resolution? No. I joined Representative Jamie Raskin, who ran the last impeachment trials, right? Hearings. He voted no he voted to table the motion as well because he knew that this wasn't practical. It wasn't going to move forward. And I'm not going to waste my time doing things that don't make sense, but I'll always stand up on principle.
Let's say you did have the votes. Would you vote for impeachment?
We would have to look at what he did. If it was something that was worthy of impeachment, and I do think that there have been many things that he's done that have been worthy of impeachment, then yes, I would. But again, that isn't going to move until Democrats have control, because what we have seen is that by and large, with very few exceptions, there aren't Republicans in Congress that are willing to hold the president accountable or call him out when he's made a mistake. I don't know where their backbone went. I don't know where their commitment to follow the Constitution, I don't know where that went. They took an oath. And whether you're a Democrat or Republican, you shouldn't allow us to bypass the Constitution when it's convenient, because it's undocumented immigrants, because it's a bad person, because it's this. The Constitution is there for a reason. The separation of powers between the executive branch, judicial branch, legislative branch are there for a reason. So we would never have a tyrant, we would never have a king, and that's what the founders intended, and I'll speak out on that no matter who it bothers.
Obviously, it's important in your case to call out Republicans where you see it. In some ways, you could argue the American people, though, are also calling out Democrats. Mm-hmm. And, there is a very low trust in polling for the Democratic Party.
Right.
Not a high trust for the Republican Party,
right,
but also low trust for the Democratic Party. A recent poll said that nearly half of Democrats don't love their country and don't consider themselves patriotic. Is this a problem for the Democratic Party?
Yeah, of course it is. And I think, whether it's Donald Trump's election or the Mondani mayoral election in New York, the two of them have something in common, although their politics are completely different. Both of them talked about the economic realities and frustration of working people, of average Americans who do not feel like the system is working for them. And what people feel is that Democrats, by and large, want to protect a system that's not working while they're frustrated. The best sort of information, polling, messaging that I have seen on the Democratic side is coming out of something called the Working Class Project. It's being led by Mitch Landrieu, former governor of Louisiana. And it's really clear what people want across the board, right? And his whole focus is, how did Democrats lose the working class, right? This is the first election in history where people at the bottom third of income earners voted more for Republicans than Democrats. And what they say is they want fairness, and they want a party that actually speaks to them. So they want fairness for everyone, but they also want to make sure that there is a party that is working for them, ordinary people, and not just for special interests, whoever that is. So people aren't happy with politics. They're not happy with what's happening in Washington, D.C. Democrats or Republicans. For me, again, I work for my district and I work for the people that work for a living. I come from that kind of background, and so many of my colleagues don't. And I think what people see with the Democratic Party is you have people who give you an academic explanation about why, out of their noble obligation, they want you to, they want to give you these things, these social programs, whereas what people want, the people I talk to every day, regardless of party, is they just want to be able to work hard in a good job and get ahead and afford a home and be able to raise their children without struggling the way their parents did. And that's not what people are seeing. And I think that frustration is real. And I think if Democrats want to start winning again, they need to start addressing these issues in a way that actually resonates, which means not talking down to people, but talking to and working with people. I can go into Coos Bay and Douglas County and Curry County just as well as I can Eugene and Corvallis, and the same message applies. People don't feel like the system's working for them, and we need to address that. I don't think the Trump administration is addressing that. I think that they're tapping into the anger and the frustration, and then they're using it to pass an agenda to reinforce a system that isn't working for working people.
I want to touch on one more thing, and I'm going to touch on state politics, even though I know you no longer in state politics, although you have experience in the state legislature here in Oregon and with the executive branch of Oregon as well. The legislative session just wrapped up here in Oregon, and they did not pass a transportation package. You're on the transportation committee in the House. This seems to have huge ramifications. We're already seeing over 500 ODOT workers laid off. This appears like it's going to have major long-term impacts as well as short-term impacts as well. From your perspective, as somebody who worked for the Bureau of Labor and Industries, was in the state legislature, and now is on the Transportation Committee in Washington, how do you see this playing out, and could this have the long-term implications that I'm seeing, at least, of potential real problems for our transportation system?
Absolutely. And so you have 450, 500 jobs. Those are good wage jobs all over this state. And that is not a small thing in a state that, we pay our taxes through income tax. But more importantly, the critical things that we do in investing in infrastructure, the Coos Bay Port is a project I've been working on for a long time. This investment in infrastructure is critical for our economy and for Oregon to be able to attract businesses, right? To make sure that people can get to the places that they need to go. When Tina Kotek was the speaker and I was the majority leader in the House, we passed a transportation package, and it was really difficult because you need the supermajorities, right? Because there's taxes that are involved. You have to work across the aisle. It was really hard, but we were laser focused on getting it done from the moment we started the session until the end. I can't speak to what happened there. What I know is that as from DC, and again, I have great concern because I'm on the Transportation Committee and there's critical investments that we're able to get money for, but if you don't have a Department of Transportation that can execute, how are we going to make the argument to get that money? But when they didn't have it done in the last couple of weeks in session, I said to my staff and to people that called me, I don't know how you pull together a deal when we're in such a polarized place that it's difficult, even at the best of times, for Democrats and Republicans to work together. But this is something where we need to put aside our red hat, our blue hat. We need to focus on what's best for the people of this state and get the transportation package passed in whatever way we need to, because it's absolutely critical. So I'm hopeful that the leadership, the Democrats, the Republicans in the legislature, the governor, can listen to constituents from all over the state that rely on a functional Department of Transportation, come up with a deal, call a special session, and get it done before it's too late.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you.